Go your way a bit. That way.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Very good, Federico. How are you?
Good, good, good. Just let me. Okay, now should be better, I hope. Here we are. Okay. Cannot see you, but I can hear you.
Perfect. That's a good start.
Okay, now I see you all.
We can see you.
Well, it
Sounds wonderful where you are.
It sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it's not bad. At least today. Also, you have sunshine, as I can see.
Yeah, this is rare.
We've got to chase the sun.
It's like the African savannah out there. It's bizarre. How are you anyway? How's things?
Good, good. Yeah, you know, a little bit tough as for everyone.
Yeah.
The lockdown here is very strict. So all the restaurants, not just in Italy, but everywhere, are closed. So we just work with restaurants. So it's pretty hard now, but at least we are living in the countryside. So that's good for us.
Absolutely.
But so we are still working because, of course, nature doesn't stop, but no revenues, I would say. Just costs.
Just cost, yeah.
Have you felt an effect with selling less wine? Or?
If we are selling, we are almost not selling wine. That's the bad part. So because especially in Italy, the online sales they are not very popular. Now they are becoming popular because of the situation, but you know, so April was a completely disaster. So our sales went down 80% compared to last year.
Gosh.
So yeah, and of course, even if we export most of our wines, around 60%, it is still, you know, almost everywhere it's everything shut down. So
Wow.
but anyway, let's talk about good things, not bad things.
Yeah, we want to talk about positive things.
We hope there's some positives to come out of this, yeah.
Yeah, we must be positive. We must be positive.
Absolutely. The only way is, do we have Alex on here?
No, I cannot see Alex. There's someone else, right?
He's living the London life, isn't he? So he might be a couple of minutes late.
Well, it's good to see everybody else. Got some,
Yeah, a lot of people.
Hello, everyone.
Tara, your hair looks great.
Loads of you are in the sun.
Meglar, Andy,
your hair
looks even better. Yes, the Boblar.
Super.
Bob got his shirt off. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, some really nice, some good sounds coming through here. A little bit of wildlife. Everybody's in the garden. So
Good.
We're waiting for Caroline as well.
Yeah, well, I think we should get cracking, shouldn't we?
Yeah, go.
Great. Well, Federico, although we haven't met in person, it's great to meet you over this over the virtual means. And yeah, obviously we wanted to start these discussions and really try and get an idea of you know what this period is doing to winemakers.
Yeah.
And how it's affecting you as individuals and also your greater business.
But how you see it come out of this and the positives to take from it and where we can move forward, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the way that we're seeing it is that this is an opportunity to kind of start again and get people to think more consciously about the way that we're eating and living, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, we hope that. We hope that for sure. So at least I think, for example, I have a good example about that. It is about we're not just we don't have just vineyards, but we also have let's say quite big vegetable garden. And we started some years ago with the idea of doing vegetables for restaurants. because the idea was a little bit to go a little bit further with the idea of farm to table restaurants, and so we started with them. Of course, with this situation, we had all the vegetables that we couldn't sell to them anymore, and so we started to work with private customers that now they have a lot more time to spend, cooking and getting involved in discovering new varieties, spontaneous herbs and everything. So because we also forage, and so that's for sure something very good that happened in those two months of lockdown. That we have now a lot of private customers that are every week are buying our vegetables.
Customers that didn't exist to you before.
Yes, exactly. So completely
retain them after this.
Yes, for sure. That's for example, it's one example of a new opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself?
Sorry.
Do you see yourself trying to go further down that route in the coming months and the rest of this year to grow more vegetables and try to sell more
actually, it's not that easy to improve the quantities in a very short time, but for sure the idea it is that we can go a little bit further on that, because people is now they have more time, so culture is increasing a lot, so that's a good part.
Have you always had the vegetable garden? When did that begin?
It started probably 5-6 years ago. That the idea, because of doing biodynamics, so the idea was not to focus anymore just on grapes, so on wine. Mm-hmm. So we started raising some animals, to grow some animals, to have a vegetable garden, to grow other crops like spelt, ancient grains for wheat, and so things like that.
Do you have much of an outlet for the grains? Are you connected with any bakers or?
Yes, we are connected with 2 bakers here in Bologna. The idea is exactly that. So to try to have a network of colleagues, farmers, artisans, restaurants. So create a community that cares a lot about what we are eating, about the environment, about the way that we live.
Mm. And did this all come from the farmers market and the whole idea behind the Posca and the connection with the slow food movement?
Yes. Sorry, I lost you. I got a call. Sorry. And so at the beginning, so we started our first farmers market like 10 years ago, and just with wine. But of course, the farmers market is a good outlet for our vegetables and other products. But the beginning was just with wine, and then the necessity of doing other crops we had, because when you have in a biodynamic farm, normally you try to have different crops, because what is something that is you discard from one crop, it can become resource to another one. So we call this a closed cycle. So of course, what we don't have waste from anyway. We don't have waste from that vegetable garden, because our pigs will eat them, and so also the manure of our pigs will come again in the new cycle, So that's a little bit, that's the idea of not being a monoculture.
Yeah. So, but when you say not being a monoculture, you mean just by growing grapes, right?
Sorry.
But when you say not be a monoculture, you mean by not only growing grapes?
Yes, exactly.
Grapes would be the monoculture, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Actually, when I arrived, because the story of where we are located, so where I'm now, used to be the farm of my grandfather and the previous generations of the family of my mom. And but in the 90s, when they passed away, they had 9. So my mom has 8 brothers, and so when they had to divide everything, we remained with the main house, but all the fields and the vineyards, they went, so they were sold by my uncles. And so I had a completely different background. So I studied engineering, and then in 2005 I had the opportunity to buy some vineyards that was exactly here in the same hill, but just 2 kilometers from here. And so at that moment we decided to start again what was interrupted. So my grandfather used to make wine in this place, and now we are doing that again.
Is this the grandfather's the one who collected bottles, right?
Yes.
He had an interest in some fine Burgundies and this kind of stuff, right?
Yes. He was a great wine lover.
But mostly conventional stuff.
Now, actually, you must think that maybe in the 50s and the 60s, you didn't have a lot of this problem of being conventional or not,
right?
Because people didn't use,
Pesticides.
Yes, pesticides and everything. So it was everything easier.
Right. Yeah.
But even sometimes when I get a bottle, people sometimes ask me about natural wines. I always answer, I don't want to call them natural wines. They're just wine as they used to be in the past.
Yeah. Exactly.
So now we have the necessity of calling them natural wines, because they are different from what we have as a mainstream. But in the past, all the wines were made without using any select yeast.
Yeah.
All the wines were not fined. All the wines were not filtrated.
Mm-hmm. So it's really just making it how it should be.
So actually, I always say I do the wine as my grandfather used to do, maybe 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So I just rediscovered what was a tradition here.
Should we bring in, introduce Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, Alex, are you out there somewhere?
Yeah. I joined.
You've gone for the beard with Richard.
Yes, Alex.
Yeah, I'm unkept.
Hi, Alex.
I like it.
Hey,
You're looking rugged.
It's pretty rugged in here.
We have a good friend of ours, Caroline, on the call as well. She's the wine queen of the north.
What introduction!
Yeah. So, but I don't see your video anywhere, Cara.
Okay.
Not going to be on video. That's okay. Oh, there you go.
There you are.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
How you doing?
Hopefully, more of a discussion.
Hi, Federico. How are you?
Hi. Good. How about you?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
I'm really happy.
Yeah. I've been working with your wine for quite a long time. I work more with the, especially in the restaurant here called Where the Light Gets in Stockport, which is the north of England, just outside Manchester, maybe like about 10 minutes in the train from Manchester city center. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm originally from Montreal. But I lived in England since 10 years now. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, one of the things that I was kind of intrigued by is the Posca and this kind of Solera system that you fell into accidentally. I don't know
exactly.
It's quite funny when I had a tasting. It was with Damiano. I think it was not with you, Alex. He corrected me. He said, no. This is perpétuel cuvée. It's not the same term that he was using. So could you explain a little bit what is this method actually? What is it?
Exactly. So that was actually a very traditional method that people in the countryside use it to do it. To achieve consistency. So exactly the opposite of what we have in those types of wines. So we always have wines that can be very different from vintage to vintage. And for us, that's good. We are happy about that, because one of the reasons why we reached the standardization on wines that we have today, for sure, is because the market started to always want the same taste, the same product, year after year, vintage after vintage. So in the past, it was completely different, as now for natural wines, so that every vintage is completely different. And in the past, especially the country people, the farmers, they didn't do just wine. So like my grandfather, they had other crops, and so even so the production of wine was very, I'd say, amatorial. So they would harvest the day that they had time. They would rack out the barrels, not with the same professional approach that we have today. So of course, those differences from vintage to vintage would be probably even more than what we are used now. And so the people, what they used to do, they used to achieve consistency, to mix the vintage together. So I always say that maybe in a very hot vintage, you would have probably here in the Colli Bolognesi red wine with maybe 14, 15 degrees of alcohol without any problem. And then maybe in a vintage like 2014, that was very rainy, maybe you had a very light red, like almost a rosé. And so the idea that they had in the past, it was to try to balance those differences. Of course, we do not achieve anymore this consistency because we are not interested in having standardized our wines. But that whole technique became very interesting with the idea of having, the story of our work, of our vintage, of our vineyards through the vintage. So we have the contribution of all the vintages, the hot one, the cold one, the rainy one, all together. And so that means that we have a wine that has a lot of different phases. So it's polyphased wine, even more than a normal natural wine that when it's from a spontaneous fermentation, you also have different different phases with different sensations from the wine, because you don't have just a single yeast that is working in the fermentation, but you have different populations, one after the other, that each one gives contribution. So the idea here with the Posca Bianca and the Posca Rossa was to have a little bit, if I say that in a vintage bottle, I have a picture of our vineyard, of one of our vineyards. Then here we have like a movie, with all the expressions of our terroir through the vintage, and also with all the grapes that we have now. So now, for example, for the Posca Bianca, we have mainly Vignoletto, but then also mainly Malvasia, Alionza, and Albana. But we also still have the memory of some grapes that we don't have anymore, like Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. Yeah, because when I arrived in 2005 in those vineyards, the previous owner, he thought, as many, like in the 90s, that to make great wines, it was supposed to have international grapes. So since I arrived, I started to craft old traditional varieties over the international ones. So I don't have a Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc anymore, but it's still being a memory in the Posca, because what happens is that the tank will never get empty.
It could be called white DNA and red DNA.
DNA, yeah.
Yeah,
Federico, maybe for the people that don't know or they've never drunk the either of the Poscas, maybe just explain quickly what exactly they are?
Yeah.
It's mostly Posca out there right now, isn't it? Most people are drinking Posca.
There's some sweet Levita.
No, people are drinking bubbles.
You on the bubble? Always on.
Yes.
Anyway, so what happens? What happens? It is for the Posca Bianca. So this is as I said, a perpetual tank. So a tank that never ends. So the Posca Bianca, so the white one, started in 2011. And the red one started in 2008. And so what happens, it's very easy. Almost every month, we rack out a small part of those tanks and we bottle. So in each bottle, if you see in the back, you should have written cuvée with the month and the year that was bottled. And then to avoid oxidation, because that's one of the main reasons, main difference compared to Solera, is that we don't search for oxidation. So to avoid oxidation, we top up immediately with other wine. And doing that, what happens? That month after month, this tank will always change a little bit, because every month we are adding a wine that is different. It's from different grapes. It's from different type of vinifications. In terms of type of vessel, we use mainly concrete tanks, big oak barrels, and amphoras. And so, of course, also the time of skin contact could be from a couple of hours up to some months.
And there was a I read about this kind of system that you began trying. It came through trying to remove using bottles. That you started it down at the farmers market and kind of grew.
Yes, yes. That's the let's say the truth. You know, the honest story. It is that I didn't think about it. It just happened by chance. Because what happened, it is then when I started this farmers market around 2008, 2009, yes, 2008. Then they were the first vintage where I was, converting all the vineyards to biodynamic and starting doing the wines without slack peas and everything. So the previous owner had a very conventional winery. So what happened at that moment, it was that I didn't have the market to sell all that wine, and so I said, okay, I'm going to the farmers market. It would be nice to to have the opportunity that people could have good wine for daily use, so that the people could come every Saturday morning and with his own bottle, and I would fill it up from them. And so that's how it started. And
topping it up as you went.
Exactly. And so some restaurants asked me to do the same thing, because the idea was the reuse of glass, so not having just the use of one bottle just once. And so we started with some restaurants, but the problem was how to ship the wine to them. And so I had to convince myself to use bag-in-box. And I wasn't really happy about that, because the bag is mainly made out of plastic. And so I made some first tests, and it came out that after a couple of months, the wine changed. And so
I remember.
yes, we tried once also in UK, and so that's why that wine is not shipped abroad. And so what happened, we started to put in the bag-in-box just what we needed for maybe a week, 2 weeks, no more than that, to avoid that problems. And also to the restaurants that we're working with, telling them to consume quite quickly, so do not leave the wine inside those plastic bags. And so what happened is that I was always with bottling, putting in the bag-in-box small amounts of wine. I was always with the problem of filling up the tanks. So that's how it started. Because at a certain point, I finished with the red Posca. I finished in 2008, and so I said, okay, I'm selling it as a Vino Rosso. So who cares about the vintage? So I started adding vintage 09, and then happened again with vintage 2010. And when I started adding 2010, I said, okay, shit, it's becoming very interesting. I didn't think about it. It was supposed to be, the very easy drinking wine, super simple and everything. And it was becoming something very interesting. And so at that moment, I remembered that in Sicily, one colleague called Francesco Guccione, he used to have a wine called Perpetuo. And so I asked him, what was about the Perpetuo? What was the difference with the Solera? And so it came out that was more or less the same thing. And so I made some research and discovered that this type of wine was done most of the parts of Italy, because it was a good way, to balance different vintages. And so I came on that without thinking. Then I just discovered when it was done.
I mean, from my experience of using both the white and the red, they are incredibly stable.
Yes, I don't know why. I must be honest.
Tell us.
And what is strange, the white is sometimes even more than the red.
Mm.
Sometimes I have bottles open for a month and a half without any. Yeah. It's incredible. I don't know why. I must be honest. Probably it's the fact of being there for so long, to have so many information on it. I don't know, but I think that when you have something that is alive, like wine, because our wines, I always say that we have life on that, because since they are not filtrated, we're still having bacteria, we're still having yeast on it, and so they will react to what happens to the wine. No. Mm-hmm. So also, I was talking about that today with some of the guys that work with me, that I was trying to explain then why I want to, why I want that the wine must fill the season. So that's why even now that's starting to becoming hot, warm, I want that the wines, they have to fill the spring. I don't want to make a fake and start to cool down the temperature, because it's important, because the whites maybe they will be damaged or anything. I think that they will react in a different way. So I think Posca, it's a little bit like that. So probably it's a wine with a lot of experience that reacts to so many things. And so maybe that's why it reacts so well, in time after opening.
Maybe another word, it makes it like adaptable.
Yes.
Kind of like it comes with like with all the tools that it requires, because it went through so much in terms of experience within it. So it's prepared to whatever. It's just
Yeah, and it's complex. It's already got such a strong biome inside it that it's stable.
The thing you said before, Federico, about feeling the seasons, I was just at the office tasting with Damiano some wines that we've kept for like 2 or 3 years, never been on the wine list because we weren't happy with them. And last time we tasted it was like, okay, maybe these are the ones that break the rule and they'll never change. And here in the UK, we've had almost 1 month of warm weather. And these were wines last year that I would be so embarrassed to show anyone. Open the bottle, is like, oh. And they're really delicious. And it's just because, this time of year is when everything moves. In winter, everything settles and comes together. But this warm weather has been enough to wake up everything and clear out a lot of impurities. And it's
exactly
crazy how quickly it can happen.
Yeah, what I was saying today, that it's not just a fact of temperature, because temperature, it's easy to replicate. When we talk about filling the seasons, it's something a lot more complex.
Yeah.
And so that's why you cannot cheat on that.
Yeah.
There's something else that I was
Right.
kind of interested by the grape Vigneto.
Sorry?
I'm kind of interested by the grape Vigneto.
Yes.
That you don't really see it apart from really in Emilia-Romagna and.
Yeah. So it's actually it's from the family of the Grecos. So you have Greco in Puglia, in Campania, in Umbria. So it's a grape from the south, I would say. It's with small berries, very rustic, with thick skin. So give us white wines with a medium, with a good body, with tannins if we keep in skin contact, and of course it doesn't give us a lot of yield because of there is a lot of skin compared to the pulp, but that means that you have that's why you can have wines with a good body. Here in Emilia-Romagna, probably in another region, we wouldn't have it with bubbles, but in Emilia-Romagna, as for most of the northern regions in Italy, the traditional was to have sparkling wines. The reason were many. So one was because it was very easy to preserve, because the wines, when they are under pressure of CO2 in the bottle, and with the lees on the lees, that will preserve the wine stable for years and years. Mm-hmm. The other fact was that paired very well with the cuisine here. So especially on Sunday, on feast day, people used to have meat and pork. So we are pretty famous for prosciutto, salame, and everything. So mortadella, and so the bubbles helps in cleaning your mouth.
To the pigs,
yeah.
And
so that's why we used to have bubbles in Piemonte very often, in Marche. So in very different regions, in the past, bubbles were very, very popular. Even if what we do, one thing that I would like to say, that's what do we do? Actually, people normally, especially abroad, they call it pet nut, but in our case, it's a little bit different because it's a second fermentation that happens now. So now it's the moment when we feel the season, when the wine starts to feel the spring and start to move. It's the moment when we bottle the wine. And people used to bottle this wine now because normally it still have a residual sugar, and being bottled now, then with warmer temperatures in summer, it started to ferment again in the bottle. So that's why it's a little bit different from the pet nuts, because it's bottled a lot later, and when the wine had time to evolve, age, and decant in the cellar during the winter. So normally there are wines that can last in the bottle for a lot of years.
Mm.
And a little bit of the confusion is because here we used to call it metodo ancestrale because it was the way of people used to do it everywhere here. But of course now, if you say this type of method in France and in Spain, where a lot of the most popular natural sparkling wines come from, they call it the same way, but actually it's a pet nut. So it's fermentation that ends in the bottle before the winter. So we are kind of midway between the pet nuts and the champenoise.
I remember you telling me a story about how before climate change and stuff, the fermentation would stop naturally because it would get colder.
Exactly.
quicker, and then it would stop, and then in spring it would start, and so you almost, that's why you did it that way before, but now because the seasons don't allow for that.
Exactly. So in the past, so my grandfather used to start the harvest here around the last week of September. Now we start by mid-August, more or less. So that's a month, or sometimes even a month and a half before what they used to do in the past.
And how many years have it's been this way? Like, when did it change, and how many other years?
Probably. So I think last vintage that I remember from my grandfather probably would be around 85, probably 84, more or less. So what is 35 years ago?
Yeah.
So I would say 35, 40 years ago. Of course, also the type of the vineyards were different, to be honest. But of course, also the climate change changed a lot. So everything now here is anticipated. So what happens now that we have a lot of time, even if we don't use super selected yeasts that make the fermentation like in 2-3 days. They start fermenting when it's still very hot, because here in August is pretty hot, and so it's quite normal to have all the wines or a lot of the wines with all the fermentation done by October, for example. And so at the beginning, what we started to do to try to make to do again, because here in the Colli Bolognesi no one was doing that anymore. Everyone moved to the Charmat method. That's the to make the second fermentation in a vat that it's under pressure. So like probably that because of the Prosecco. Prosecco is most of the Proseccos are done with that method. That's super super fast. And so all the wineries here had to change. So from this traditional method to the Charmat method, and so we decided to go back a little bit, and so we had to adapt at the beginning. So at the beginning we started to just freeze some must from the same grapes, and then to add back to the wine, to the dry wine now in spring, kind of tirage, but without, of course, any sugar, just with the natural sugar in the original must. But then we discovered that we could also do that without freezing the must. We started cooling down the must at 1-2 Celsius degrees. And then we decided to try to help, I would say, the fermentation stop by itself, just blending sometimes, wines that are fermenting with musts that still have to start fermenting. And doing that, now we have some good quantities of wine that remain naturally sweet.
And is there like the reason from like freezing it to unfreezing it? Do you think that keeping it to like a controlled temperature is actually keeping some of the more yeast and more like bacteria that will actually benefit the?
No, the point is even when we were, so the idea is to be less invasive. When we were freezing the must, we were freezing something around between 3-5% of the total amount, so a small part.
Yeah.
And even if we have frozen it, when we started to melt, and it started to ferment again without using anything. So I don't know how, but the yeast inside, they were still alive anyway.
Yeah.
And but now, so to try to be, so again, less invasive, we try to not, actually we have not been freezing a must anymore since, I don't know, 8 years, probably 7-8 years. And now we have just wines that are slightly sweet, then they are bottled. So, for example, with everything that happened now, I was supposed to bottle I would bottle probably last week, but I decided to wait a little bit. So I will bottle in the first week of June, because I prefer to put some costs a little bit ahead. This would be better. But for example, the wines are already starting fermenting. So I'm quite lucky that this year I have a lot of residual sugar, so I can wait a little bit, but the wines are already bubbling. And so at a certain point, if the residual sugar goes down too quick, then I will have to bottle immediately. So I'm just waiting.
Wow. Living life.
I'm interested to know just about the other grape varieties that you use in the Posca.
Yes.
They're all native grapes.
So the first one that I would like to talk is one that's very, very, very local and unknown. That's called the Alionza, Alionza, Alionza. And it's very local grape, almost unknown. That's super nice because it's very fresh. It gives a lot of acidity. We tried also to make some maceration skin contact on that. But yes, I prefer it to give freshness to the wines. We also do a special cuvée of the sweet lievity that's called the Plus. That's half Pignoletto and half Alionza. And that one especially helps us in having a wine that can last for years and years. For example, now we are selling the Plus Vintage 14. So it has been on the lease for 5 years. And then we reintroduced the Albana. That's very common. It used to be very common here, but it's more very common in Romagna. That's the region nearby us. And the last one is Malvasia. The Malvasia is super aromatic and special for skin contact is very interesting. So one of the cuvées of the sweet lievity is called M&M, and it's made of Pignoletto, half Pignoletto and half Malvasia, that remains in skin contact in a Georgian Fevri for 2.5 months, 3 months.
You're using a lot of different methods to store. So you're using barrels as well, right? And stainless steel.
Yes, I use. So when I arrived at the winery, they just bought a lot of new stainless steel tanks, with all the temperature control and everything. And so I decided to go back and start to have again big barrels. I bought used big barrels, and then I started working with the amphoras. First with some amphoras bought here in Italy. Then I started with the Georgian Fevris, and also I restored a lot of concrete tanks. Really like. So now, actually, I try to not ferment anything in stainless steel. I normally ferment, I would say, for the whites mainly in concrete tanks, and a good part in amphoras, but also special one wine that's called Nel Grotto in big oak barrels of 2,100 liters, and the reds. Sorry.
Is that like the big foudre, or just?
Botti, yes, Botti, big food. Yes, exactly. And the reds mainly in again in big barrels.
What factors come into your decision-making process when you choose and decide which vessel you're going to age the wines in?
So depends a lot about the wine. So actually, for example, I have several vineyards with Pignoletto grape, and I decide what will go in the Posca, what will go in the Sui Lieviti, normally about in the spring. Or maybe I have an idea before, but the idea is that the vinification is made vineyard, so separating vineyard from vineyard, so that we have at least a feedback of what we are doing in the fields. If we are going the right way or in the back, or we have to manage something different in the next vintage. So to be honest, every wine has its own path that we don't decide, before. It just comes as as we start to understand a little bit about it.
Yeah,
that's a little bit the idea. So I would say I don't have a goal for every wine. I just try to be with the wine, just to stay aside and see if something goes bad or start to go bad, then could be my intervention on that.
Should we move on to mortadella?
You took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to start talking about the pig.
Yeah, we can't have a conversation without mortadella.
Yeah. I had
also, would we have had? We would have. No, not quite. The party would have been soon.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see what happens.
I saw a thing on Facebook the other day for the first one. Like I got a reminder about the first one was a couple of weeks ago or something.
Yeah, it was so soon. I don't remember. The first one at Pifranco.
Because the first one was earlier because I think it was like pre-spring tasting.
Yeah, it could be.
It's an annual.
Yeah, actually, spring tasting was supposed to be this weekend.
Sunday.
Yeah, shit.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm thinking whether I'm less stressed than normal for this week or the same. I'm kind of glad not to have to look after 30 of you, I must admit. You
won't remember me, but we had a few encounters at with the mortadella in Copenhagen at Manfred's.
Ah, yes. Cool.
And actually, once recently, I was just looking through my pictures. I had a video of you making a pizza in a bar I don't even know what the bar was called in Sweden, in Stockholm.
Last year,
June last year.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
At Babette.
Right, exactly. Making pizzas for everybody.
Well, are you two together?
Well, I was a recipient, and Federico was making pizzas. It was a boozy affair.
Can you imagine?
There was much booze involved, so I'd leave it at that.
But yeah, when did you start raising pigs, Federico?
So it was probably in 14, I think, maybe around 2014, I think, or maybe even 2013. Well, okay, probably 6-7 years ago. And the idea was, again, I want to put animals in the farm. We need animals in the farm because a farm needs animals. I wasn't allowed in the beginning, so it would be very complicated for bureaucracy and on the laws and everything. But started a project that, of course, then just after I started, it was aborted, so it's finished. And so I went by myself. So I started to raise pigs free range outside from an ancient breed called the Mora Romagnola. It's a black pig, hairy black pig. And what happened is that I didn't know what to do with the pigs at the beginning. So I said, okay, what I'm going to do, a prosciutto or salame and everything. And then I said, okay, I'm Bologna. Bologna is famous for the mortadella. And mortadella is the most popular salume in Italy because every kid, when used to go to school, had a sandwich with mortadella. So it was very popular also because it was cheap and very industrialized.
Made with a lot of shit inside, usually.
Exactly. And so the idea was to see if I used the best meat that I could have to make the most popular, say, cold cut, could become something different. So I always say that I don't want to be a mortadella maker because actually I just have the right amount of pigs. That's not a lot to be balanced in my farm. But at the same time, I have now I have 8. I have always between 8 and 12, 15, no more than 15. And the idea it is to do a provocative mortadella. So it's like an open source mortadella. So I always share with everyone how I do it because the idea is to improve the other mortadellas. So I started with the quality of the meat. Then, of course, after a couple of years, some mortadella makers started to do with free-range pigs. So at least it convinced someone to use better meat to make mortadella. And then it went with also the selection of all the let's say everything that we put in the mortadella. That normally it's pepper. I found
pistachios or no pistachios?
No pistachios. No pistachios. In Bologna, we don't have pistachios.
Okay.
You get chased out of the restaurant.
Yeah, it's a big question. I had to ask you. I've been thinking for a while.
And so pepper, garlic, salt, nutmeg that we use in the mortadella, they are from very interesting selections. So the idea it was again to go another step forward. That's a little bit the idea. And I started doing with a collaboration with another mortadella maker. So that actually borrows me the machinery because machinery it's quite expensive and wouldn't have any sense to do it by myself. But they are pretty, gentle to borrow me the machinery for one day, and the other hand, they see what I am doing. So that's a little bit the idea. And I don't do a lot of them. It's just something that I have fun, and it's a good excuse to make a mortadella party everywhere. And
definitely one to put on the calendar.
Yeah, well, maybe this year, maybe we can do it at the end of the year. If not, if not, next year is going to have to be a really big one. Make sure you don't have a flight to meet your family in the morning.
Yeah.
Online mortadella party.
Yeah, it's a great shout.
Shall we see who's out and wants to throw in a few questions? We've got some power.
Go ahead.
You lot are up on the screen right now, this rowdy crowd at the top right. Copenhagen crew.
We're tuning in from Copenhagen.
What are you saying?
Having a house party.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody.
What are you drinking? Beer.
They can do it.
Yeah, things are moving there. That's a sign of the future right there.
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions,
yeah, I think
unmute yourself.
So, first one, your T-shirt, Federico, says 24-hour pizza party or pizza people or something.
Yeah, pizza people.
Yeah, what is that? Sounds amazing.
It's actually from some guys that have a pizzeria chain in Bologna called Berberet, and they also have I think 3 restaurants now in London called the Radio Alice.
Okay.
And they do very good pizzas, so it was a gift from them.
In London, you said?
In London, yes. Radio Alice is called.
We would pronounce it Radio Alice.
Ah, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
So, but going back to the whole like amphora cadaverity fermentation vessel kind of thing, do you find? I mean, there's a lot of. Firstly, like, do you find difference between the Italian amphora that you use and the cadaverity, or do you treat them differently? And also, like, thoughts-wise, there's a lot of stuff out there about trying to keep the cadaverity tradition is very much intertwined with the Georgian culture and the Georgian winemaking traditions, and not so much actually is a style of fermentation. And perhaps is it like the feel of using the local like clay as amphora rather than just importing vessels over from another country? Like, how does that sit with you, and do you actually notice any difference between the two types of vessels?
Very good question. Actually, I always say that I'm still studying the amphoras. Even if I am working with the amphoras for almost, I think, 10 years. I didn't understand exactly the amphoras yet. So that's why I don't have a wine made just from being fermented in the amphoras. I started with, the idea was to start with the Italian ones because of, exactly with the local clay. Also because we also had in the past, but I mean, probably centuries and centuries ago, the tradition of doing wines also in the clay. But since Middle Age, probably it was done mainly in oak, and then in the last century in concrete tanks. So it is something very in the past. So we didn't have a recent tradition on that. And especially when I started with the Italian amphoras, they were kind of what we call orci. That's a kind of pot, clay pot, used to contain olive oil. And so actually the shape and how it was done, it wasn't really linked to something that was really traditional in the past. And I wasn't really happy about the results that I had. What I searched on the doing wines in the amphora wasn't a kind of taste of the clay. Sometimes I always also make a joke saying it tastes like a brick. I don't want that. And especially in the beginning, I had that sensation. And so I had to try to find something that was less invasive. Because the idea was I didn't want to have an amphora that was kind of a new barrique. For years and years, the aromas that the barrique gave to the wine was considered cool, it was considered good quality. And of course, that was just a trend, then it passes away. The idea it was if I was interested in the amphoras, I wanted to understand more about it. And so, of course, where it remained the tradition until today, a little bit in Spain, in Portugal, but mainly in Georgia. And so, knowing some friends, some colleagues in Georgia, I had the opportunity to buy directly from them Georgian Kvevris, so different type of shape, different type of clay, different temperature that they are cooked. So that means also different possibility to the wine to breath. So the porosity is different. And I had also the opportunity to, since I didn't want kind of clay taste or aroma in the wine to have bigger ones, compared to the ones that I could have in Italy. Because the idea was a little bit like with oak, If you have a small barrel, of course, you have a surface that is higher compared to the volume. If we have a very big fudro, botte or barrel, is exactly the opposite. So the aromas of the wood wouldn't be that much as in a barrique in a big barrel. So the idea was a little bit the same with the amphoras. And also another thing that was interesting, it is year after year, the amphoras lose a little bit that kind of taste. And so using for several vintages, it becomes better and better. And so now I start to understand a little bit more. I also have to make a trip to Georgia. I really would like, because I want to understand exactly how used to be the consumption of the wine in Georgia. Because normally the wine is made in Georgian Cuvée. They didn't used to go in the bottle. They were used at home, just to pair with the traditional food from Georgia. So it's very interesting. It's very easy to make wine in a cuvée because it seems so natural, so easy. But at the same time, I have some doubts in how to manage. I'm still learning, and so I have to study a lot more about it. I hope I've answered.
Oh, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie.
Any other questions?
I
Go ahead.
have a question. Just interested to know, like, how you growing up in Brazil affected your thought process, your kind of evolution as like your identity being now in Bologna and like has it made you? I'm just interested to know how that's affected kind of your.
Skål. That's really Brazilian. No, actually, I feel even if my family is from Bologna.
Brazilian here with us as well. So.
Oh, there's a Brazilian.
Oi. Tudo bem.
Eles estão tentando que a gente.
So even if my family is from Bologna, they moved to Brazil when I was 3 years old. So I grew up there and I made all the schools there. So I feel definitely at least half Brazilian. And my family is still living there, so I go quite often. I talk to my kids in Portuguese, even if they don't understand me, but at least I try.
It's like Caroline and her kids, but they speak fluent French. It's pretty crazy how well they speak French.
And then I would say that I was when I was a kid in Brazil, of course, the idea of wine, the culture of wine in Brazil in the 80s wasn't really superb, I would say. So I remember the things that we used to drink at home in São Paulo, and they were kind of nasty, I would say. But at least I had the opportunity to come and visit my grandparents, during the holidays, and that was completely different. So I had an education directly from my grandfather, and of course from my uncles, my mom, and so that helped me a lot. And so when I came back to when I moved back to Bologna for college, I started to work as a sommelier. I made a sommelier course and then I started working as a sommelier. So it was something that was a passion in the family. that was very natural for me. So to start again, and being in Europe was a lot easier compared to Brazil. Even if now in Brazil it's completely different. So now you can have great wines in Brazil, also from Brazilian winemakers in the south. So I visited some 2 or 3 years ago. So.
Do you remember? Is there any? I mean, you mentioned those bottles that you used to drink with your grandfather, and that he was
Yeah.
collecting. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind from all the way back then that you can?
Yes. So, for example, my grandfather for a period, he used it when he was young. He used to work in Torino, so in Piemonte, and then he was in the World War II in in a division made mainly of people from Piemonte, and so after World War II, he had a lot of friends in the Langhe. So even when I was kid, it was quite normal during they used to do that in the truffle season. So when I was in Brazil, but sometimes it happened that they didn't have time to go. And so just before Christmas, they used to make a trip to the Langhe. And so I could go with them. So when I was a kid, I used to go to visit Gaia, used to go to visit, all the big producers, some that became after maybe some of the Barolo boys, so the innovative. And so the ones that I do not appreciate now what they had done like in the 90s. But at that time, I had at least the opportunity, to understand about the wine, about tradition. And then when I was in college, seeing the difference, of the new producers that were starting introducing barriques in the tradition, and the ones that didn't want. He was very friend of the Rinaldi, both Francesco and Beppe Rinaldi. So I had the chance to visit all those great producers when I was a kid.
Yeah. Very lucky.
And of course, also the fact of having very good bottles at home. But unfortunately, he passed away when I was 16. So I didn't have the time and the chance to get everything.
Yeah. Just a little taste.
Yeah, sometimes when we are here, sometimes we open a bottle that he maybe had from a Barolo from the 60s or from the 50s. And normally it's undrinkable, but we try anyway.
What do you make of this DOC over Pignoletto?
Excuse me? Why? I didn't.
What's the situation with the DOC? Is it DOC?
Yeah, actually it's a DOCG.
Right.
It's a bad question at this moment because I always, even if I don't need to be a DOC or DOCG wine, I always wanted to, yes, be part of, we are in a very small area, unknown, so nobody cares about Colli Bolognesi. All the producers can be conventional, organic, or biodynamic, but they are all small, so they are all vintners. That's for me is really important. Probably we are not more than 30, with an average production of 20,000 bottles, so very small, all very small. And so I had the chance of sell the wine abroad, and I even also in Italy, just out of Bologna, because most of them sell like 90% of the wine in the city of Bologna. And so I thought that it would be, if I believe in a terroir, in a wine region, I should not hide where we are from, even if it doesn't give us anything, it's just bureaucracy and everything. I would say since a couple of months ago, because my wines failed in the commission for the DOC. So I didn't run away from the DOC, but it just expelled me. So vintage 19 and some of the 18s will not be DOC.
That means I don't really understand the rules of the DOC, but does it mean that you cannot put the name Pignoletta on the bottle of the wine?
Exactly. It will be just white wine.
But it is 100% Pignoletta. Yes.
The point is, it's tried to protect from fake Pignolettas from other place. In that case, I think it is right, because of course what happens if you just buy the grapes and put a lot of Pignoletta, maybe, I don't know, in Puglia, or I don't know, in Moldova, you know, and just to call in the same name, to know after a work that someone has done, I think it has something to do with the terroir that the wine comes from. So I believe with the idea of the appellation system where the wine comes from. That's the point. But of course, then what happens, and it's not actually our problem, what happens it is that the wine now today, it's not what the small producer do, but what the big industry does. So the standard changed, and so that's why probably my wines failed, because you have a commission that tastes the wines, you know, and they are made by, especially by enologues, so winemakers, so people that are very technical, and so they will prefer a taste that is more mainstream, I would say.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's the same as everywhere. You're making differently to the mainstream, and therefore it doesn't fit into the right category.
Exactly. That's a little bit the problem. Okay. But anyway, so probably next year I will not have all the wines with the DOC. Let's see.
We'll still drink them.
Yeah, well, that doesn't change a lot. I feel bad. I feel bad for the region, not for me.
Yeah,
that's just that.
Are there other winemakers who you can partner with and you can gather some support for that?
Yeah, from the region, yes. Probably the one that I prefer from the Colli Bolognesi, it's called the Al di là del Fiume.
Yeah.
Al di là del Fiume is a very small winery. I think they have an import in UK, but I'm not really sure. But they export almost everything, because no one can understand what they are doing here. But it's pretty nice, and maybe there are a couple of 2 or 3 more that are doing good things, I would say. That's the good part. The bad part is that we have probably, I would say, at least 4 or 5 very young vintners in the Colli Bolognesi, but all of them, they are very technical because they come from school and everything. So they do wines that are, for me, too old. So they are young, but they are old in the winemaking. But that's quite common also in other places in Italy or worldwide.
And in comparison, old with the young winemaking.
Yes, because what happened is that sometimes, they, like, for example, that's a funny story. There is now I have a girl that helps me in the cellar. Her name is Fabia, and she got graduated last year, and so she has been harvesting with me for 3-4 years probably. And so last year, 2 years ago, she asked me, I would like to improve. I would like to understand a little bit more. What do you recommend me? I said, okay. I think that because talking, why we were fermenting the wines and everything, I said to her, I think you are becoming too technical. School, it's teaching you to be afraid, to have fear about everything. I think you need some experiences that are exactly the opposite of what they teach in school. I'm not saying that what you teach in school is not good to you to know, but it's not the only thing that happens outside, you know. And so I sent her to Cantina Giardino for 10 days during the harvest. And so then she understood that you can make great wines without any techniques. And then she went last year. Then she got graduated and she started working with me. And I said, okay, you can start working with me, but you have to travel. I want you to make experience, you know. You stay working with me, but anytime I have the opportunity to give you an experience in other wineries, I will do it. So last year she went to Foradori. That was a bad decision because, you know, Foradori, they have exactly the opposite of Cantina Giardino. They are supernatural, they're biodynamic, but they have all the best machineries and everything. So when she came back, she was looking to our cell like, oh, what is that? You know, it looks like a garage. And then to balance, she just went for the harvest in Australia, Alex.
Yeah.
What did she learn in Australia?
With Gareth of Gentle Folks.
Oh, cool.
So, and so she spent there 4 or 5 weeks, you know, while we were here in the lockdown. She was there harvesting with Gareth, and she enjoyed a lot. So, you know, we have always to learn. We have always, and when she comes back, she comes with experience also that's important for us. So that's why why I visit a lot of colleagues worldwide when I have the chance, because we always learn something new. We can have good ideas. That's the worst thing of this moment, that we cannot travel, we cannot see our friends, we cannot see our colleagues.
Yeah. True.
Hopefully that's relaxed soon.
I have another question for you.
Yes, please.
Kind of like more related to farming than, like, because you were saying, you know, obviously when you are making wine and you're looking after vines, the moment of harvest, you don't kill the vines, you harvest them, and then they're still alive, and you know there's another vintage the year after. But when you have pigs, you have to kill them.
Yes, that's a really bad part.
And what's your how is it for you? How is it different in terms of farming? You know, because it's, I mean, I'm not saying it like as I'm from my dad is a grower and he's a hunter and a fisherman, so you know I'm used to both ways. So I'm used to kill the animals and eat it, and I'm used to harvest, you know. Yeah.
So I can say that even before I started to raise pigs and other animals, wasn't a vegetarian as I'm not now, but I always had a lot of respect for the animals. Even when I used to go to hunt with my uncles, the idea, it was a lot about the idea of the animal that was sacrificed in the feast day. You know? So people, I always say that people in the past, especially I would say for at least for Italy, we didn't, even if people think about Emilia-Romagna and think about prosciutto, you know, everything made with meat, people, especially in the countryside, but also in the city, they didn't used to have meat every day. They would have meat probably once a week, and probably that day would be Sunday, where all the family was all together, where you had, you know, other family members that came to visit you, and it was the moment that you got the rabbit, got the chicken or the pig or everything or anything. That was the moment of the sacrality of killing another another animal, you know, for the holiday, you know, and so it was a moment that has its own sacredity. It has respect in being something very important that moment. And so for example, all the pigs that go to the slaughter, I go with them, and I want to be part of that, because that's give me, you know, the idea of not having more, and to be respectful with them then and in the future, so with the new ones, and be respectful with the use of meat in general life. So I would say probably I eat meat probably once, twice, especially now that I'm always at home. I eat meat very, very, very rarely. But that's not because I don't. I think we should be all vegetarians. I think we can be, omnivore, but with idea of being more balanced, and with with the sacredity of what happens when you kill an animal. Sometimes we also kill a vegetable so I'm not judging on that, but I think we because of lifestyle, you know, with all the of the richness of the last 50, 60 years, we this lifestyle taught us that we should have meat at cheap price every day. I don't think that's sustainable, but I think that it doesn't have any I don't find a word in English. It's not ethic. It's not ethic. At all.
I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, the reason why I'm asking you is because I know your feelings about it in many ways, and I respect that, and I share these feelings, and I'm interested in more and more in the idea of bringing back feelings when you eat animals.
I respect.
I respect experience.
I respect more. Sorry to interrupt you. I respect you. I respect more a hunter that go and hunts to feed himself. And I know a lot of hunters, so that sometimes it's not like that. But so the hunter that goes and hunts something for his family, for also maybe for his friends, but you know, to respect the animal that he just hunts. More than, you know, housewife that just buy, you know, some cheap meat in the supermarket without seeing or thinking what's behind. So that's a little bit thing.
Absolutely. I can agree with that.
Great.
I think it's a good way to kind of draw a conclusion around this. Is like how we intend to all move forward in the future from here.
Yeah.
You know, everything's fucked at the moment. We know that, and hopefully, if we can take some real positives away into the future, it's that we really begin to rebuild again the right way. Yeah. We can rebuild things, and hopefully this will raise awareness towards where things are coming from and make people slightly more aware. And you know, we're seeing more people kind of turning to cooking and thinking about where food's coming from.
Buying locally.
And yeah, supporting local small independent businesses that have been around through this. And I hope that we can really move into a new era of more awareness around treating the soil the right way. And I'm not sure. I mean, what's your perspective on it? Do you see any kind of new movement coming from this, where people's more
I would say I wonder that. I really wonder that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. If I would say that if not that, then we will never move anything, because this is huge. So to have something more than this, so this is the occasion to change. But I think people probably had a lot of time to to read, to take time to think about. For me, it was a moment. So those 2 months were that I was privileged, because I'm still working. I didn't feel, to be honest, the lockdown, because I was always going to work. I was always outside. I had the opportunity also to deal with people, even not in the same way, but I started to make deliveries. So I was, delivering the wine and vegetables to people in their house, just if it was just for a few seconds, but seeing people different and seeing also the reaction of people. So I think that in those 2 months I had a lot of time of thinking about, what's going to be next, the opportunities that we can have now. So just to make an example, I was supposed to open a restaurant in April, beginning of April, with some chef. It's one of the partners and another restaurant owner with me, with the idea of, again, have a really farm-to-table restaurant. And of course, everything started. So we said, okay, let's stop it, everything. Fortunately, we didn't hire anyone yet. And so let's think again in September if we are going to open. And then after a while, after our first month, we decided to change everything. So we are going to open in a couple of weeks anyway, because we are quite optimistic that people will think in a different way. And even if the beginning will be hard, so probably we will start just with takeaway, but we are opening a new business even now. So the idea is exactly to start thinking that people had the opportunity to think and restart thinking, consuming in a different way. Of course, our customers will not be the ones that are terrified at home, that in Italy, probably more than, for sure from Denmark, compared to Denmark, but probably also from to England. In Italy, the mass media and the government try to terrify a lot the people, so that they could not have any problems in terms of we didn't have any riots, no one saying that it was against all this lockdown, and also how slow we are opening things in Italy. And so a lot of people are still very terrified, but the ones that are, especially the younger people, they want to, start something new. They want to start something in a different way. So I think those will be our customers, and will be the people that will trust in what we are doing.
Yeah. I mean, we're on our side, we're riding the same hope.
Yeah.
The same thing as you, that people will hopefully begin to look for something new, look for a change, and maybe this can be the change for them. Who knows?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yes. We have to be optimistic.
Yeah.
I'm really optimistic. So.
Yeah, me too.
So, for example, we have here we have a kind of bed and breakfast, So we have 5 rooms that, of course, now they are closed. And I'm planning to open by mid-June, because I think a lot of people from that will, of course, not from abroad, that it was always our main customers here, but from people from maybe locals that after lockdown, they will want to come here, enjoy, you know, a little bit of stay in the countryside, swimming pool, wine tasting, you know. And I made some deals with the restaurants because of course the restaurants here, they probably will be able to open June 1st. And the idea is to move the restaurants here so that you have more space. You can have private dinners or special dishes served with a wine tasting. So the idea is try to help each other, you know.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing in this side as well. I mean, there's no wineries involved, unfortunately, but we're seeing
breweries.
Yeah, we're seeing community. You know, the communities coming together and people are helping each other out. We're being supported a lot by other people around us, and we're trying to support everything that we can around us as well. So it's great to see that through this, that good people are coming together.
Yeah, I'm very confident on that.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I think we'll finish the conversation in optimistic fashion.
Must be. I know everyone out there, so I would like to know what they think.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Federico, thank you very much for your time. We'll let you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, see you there soon, I hope.
It's been wonderful to talk to you, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, and I hope to have you here. You're all here soon.
At the earliest opportunity.
And I hope
Have a good weekend, guys.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.